And welcome. Happy Friday night, Anime Orange. First, maybe we should introduce ourselves. I'm Emma, and my main knowledge for this panel would be the Sword Art Online aspect. So, yeah, and I'll pass it on to you guys to introduce yourselves.
I'm Marie, and my very first panel. And yeah, I also watch Sword Art Online.
Yeah.
Okay.
No shame in that.
What about like Dot Hacker?
Yeah. Also, yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah, my name is Benoit Tassir. I've worked in animation for 16 years. And, well, despite the fact that I work in North American animation, I love Japanese animation. And I think my interest is also sort of art online, which is obviously the big one, but also Log Horizon. And sort of got introduced with .act when it came out. So.
Yeah, so that's us. So any topics that you guys would like to talk about first? Yeah?
Player killers?
Player killers, that's an interesting topic.
Because if you're trapped in a world,
If you are trapped in an MMORPG and you die in the game, what would happen to those player killers after you get out?
Well,
Depends if they have records of like who you killed.
Yeah.
because obviously it depends on what the writers of the series decide to do. I mean, you compare Log Horizon to say Sword Art Online, and the rules are obviously very different to the point where you don't care as much about player killers and all.
When you say Log Horizon is a little bit more insidious, though?
Yes,
Because,
yes, it is.
Spoiler alert. The entire point of dying in Log Horizon is that you forget.
Yeah.
Versus Sword Art Online, you die, and like it's been like the first chapter is like that.
It's also interesting. They really in Log Horizon they really cut off the characters from the real world to the point where they're not even thinking about it. You don't even know what's happening to their bodies or if anybody tried to wake them up or anything like that. They're really cut off from the world. So we don't even know why they're stuck there. How come they're stuck there? That's one of the big mysteries of the show. I'm kind of hoping they'll touch on that later. But yeah.
Whereas Sword Art Online, we know what happens to their bodies.
Yes.
We know that there's a microwave and sort of thing embedded in the nerve gear that if anything happens where somebody's trying to get you out of that state, that sort of coma-like state that they go into, dead.
And I actually follow through with death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, one of the big questions that a lot of people started asking, I know online about Sword Art, was how people stayed alive all that time in the game. Just thought I'd bring that up before, we get any deeper. Well, the nerve gear, it had a little bit of a battery life, so they were able to be transferred to hospitals. But of course, microwaving the brain isn't the hospital can't stop.
No, well, there were fail-safes in case of electricity shortage for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
But it's a nasty little experiment, really.
Yeah.
That's what it was, a pretty sick little experiment.
And I saw a hand go up on the set first. So,
I'm still kind of shocked when Kirito kind of first wakes up and then gets out of bed to walk this.
yeah, he wouldn't be able to do that. His muscles wouldn't be in the shape to let him do that.
it was love.
Well, as somebody who has physically broken a bone and hasn't been able to walk for some good amount of time, I know that it physically would not be possible. I was more mobile than him, and it took me a while to get, able to do stuff.
I think that when you get to in these situations, creators kind of know that the character would do that, but they do take some dramatic license at some point.
Yeah.
Say, okay, like If I wait for the guy to be able to get, I'm going to wait a long time to get on with the next step. So they kind of speed up, of course, they cheat. Then again, whether it's live action or animation, they always do that, because if you really go absolutely real life how it's supposed to be, some characters would never make it past their first injury when they get into a fight sometimes. So
Yeah, like characters like Sachi in Sword Art Online would have died a lot sooner. Like, even though she was only there for an episode, she wouldn't have made it that far if we were being realistic.
I have a question. If you were killed by a PK, does the PK loot everything that's on your body? Or no? Because I think it was really ambiguous.
I think it was ambiguous too.
Because it's like, why would you kill if there's no reward,
Yeah.
let's say, so to speak, or whatever
Well,
you
people
do
might
that.
go crazy.
Okay.
There's always the psychological aspect of it, where if you're trapped in a game, if you're trapped anywhere, a lot of people have different reactions. They talked about that in the show, and I think maybe Hans, who's first? Somebody over.
you got some people who just did it for the fun of it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Then
exactly.
there's also the aspect of, well, this guy's in my way
Yeah.
as well. So there's all sorts of reasons. Even if you don't get that reward,
There's also people might be like, he's in my way. I need to beat him
Yeah.
so that I can move on. I can level up. I can
Yeah.
beat the game and get myself out of here.
Yeah.
They could beat it for the low level, like grinding monsters.
Yeah.
That would be one reason.
Exactly. Let's go. Yes, the red hat.
Well, there were also like party PK guilds that when they're in SAO, like they ran into one at one point when they were trying to recover that like rare item. And also, I guess there'd be like some situation where you wanted to hire an assassin who takes a note politically in that kind of world. Like those things would arise, I think, too. I would hope that they at least get the loot for killing someone, or else it'd be like, no point unless they really, really enjoyed it. Even then.
there were some sick characters.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of sick sort of characters. You and then you, okay?
I'm going by the dot hack sign
Yes.
that although the one instance was one of the players was trapped but in that case with the PK, what they were doing, they can, upon killing another player, they would search the loot of the person and take whatever items they wanted. And this happened with BLT and I forget the twin dagger PK, but oh no, sorry, BT. The L was dropped because the character doesn't like lettuce, so and it was named after the eponymous BLT sandwich without the lettuce. But when I saw that and then Sword Art Online, it's logical to probably think that they do have access to the elite.
It is a game, and it is fairly logical that that would be part of the game's mechanics in the first place. Because that would happen if you were in a regular MMO.
Well, they didn't have it in
Killed
the
something.
second season, like the.
True.
But
The second season, or the second arc, though, they were trapped, but they weren't trapped. Asuna was the only one who was trapped, really. And that was creepy. But,
But he had a vested interest in not getting killed, otherwise he had to start right at the
true.
right again. So while it wasn't as dramatic personally, the stakes were still very high.
Very true. So, you?
Okay. So I guess two things. First, for Sword Art Online, in terms of whether people do get the loot from PKing, actually it was confirmed that they do. For the one arc where I guess the husband kills his wife,
Oh, yeah.
he actually managed to get all her stuff. So I think that
They have a marriage.
no, it was joint, but there was also during that they discussed that there's a possibility that someone had attacked her to steal what she was carrying from her head. I guess the other thing that I wanted to ask people was, after people got out of Sword Art Online, the reaction society had to the PKers was to just send them to reformatory school. They didn't give anyone jail time, they still added the idea that, oh, this just occurred in a game. We can't actually hold them fully to account for killing people, even though they knew that happened. So I was wondering if people thought that was an ethical response, or if they should have tried to give people jail time if they were of age and they had been involved in PK.
Personally, I believe they should have tried to do jail time, just because they're killing people, you know?
Like, that's from the perspective of people who understand. Like,
They could also,
if you look at it from an outside perspective, people are like, even just in general, people don't really understand. Right? So, yeah.
But the problem is, of course, again, it's a question of, well, it is really a question of perception. Are you able to perceive, understand the difference between reality and fiction here? And what is fiction? What is reality? The rules are very clearly spelled out at the beginning of the show. You die in the game, you die in real life. That's it. Every player has been told that by the big ghost in the sky. So people who are player killers, if they didn't understand that, sorry, they got a mental problem. They got a problem in terms of
which is
understanding.
probably, if it did go to a court case, they could probably need some sort of insanity.
But the thing is, I think they should go to court. They should be tried, and if they are found insane, then they should get treatment. But if they're found not insane, they should get prison time. Because, like I said, the rules were very, very clear, spelled out to everybody. You die in this world, you die in the real world. And that was very clearly explained.
What if kill somebody who's trying to kill you, though? Same moral legal loopholes.
Self-defense. Then you got a case of self-defense. You still got to go to court. But you still have a case of self-defense in this case.
Okay, I saw hands over here first. So one of you.
I think you take like psychologically. I mean, when the big ghost in the sky tells everyone the rules, it's kind of a very unbelievable situation. I think some people
You're right. But there again, it's a question of evaluating if the person was able to differentiate between what was going on, what is real and what is not. Now, of course, the situation does create a lot of confusion. You know, but.
Well, I mean, if you look at the novels, they say that some people committed suicide thinking that it was just like some kind of prank, thinking that if they died, they would just wake up in the hospital bed and everything would be fine.
But suicide and murder are not exactly the same thing.
Right, but in a sense, you kind of get a feel of how some people who would think that. I think one of the episodes, a girl tells her that it's okay to kill people because we don't know for sure if they really die or not.
No, but there again, it becomes a moral debate. Do you really want to find out? You know, do you kill somebody just to find out if they really died? You know?
And if you do,
That's
how do you know?
kind of sick.
And also there's the fact is if
Do you want to take a chance?
Yes, like if you do, how do you know that, you know?
Exactly. So if you actually kill somebody in that world, how do you know they don't die?
It should.
So do you really take the chance? Well, actually, the smarter thing to do would be don't kill.
Exactly. There's also, what I was going to say is, actually I lost my train of thought just now, so let's go on to someone else, I guess. Yeah.
It was, of my opinion, with what everyone else has said, and trying to find sufficient proof in the logs of 4 years of 2 years?
2 years.
Of gameplay, and then trying to figure out to an outsider, because this has to be proven to someone who has never played an MMO, lawyers and judges and like, that these circumstances mean that person, this behavior means, ignoring the chat logs, that person was being killed, and that the murderer was the one watching the fight with the NPC, even though the murderer was the one that let that person die and led the monster there. It becomes so complicated that anyone that has survived the 2 years obviously went through a harrowing and traumatic experience, whether they were a player killer or not, which made me think that even if jail time is something that would come in the future, that they had to go to reform, because the alternative would be sitting in jail, waiting for their court date to come up, not getting the treatment they needed to be debriefed and treated for just everything that comes with the trauma of that kind of situation, and living it for 2 years with no exit.
Because then you might wind up with the situation that once they come out of that world, even if you accept that there's a question of trauma and everything, then you wind up with the question, well, now that they're in the real world, do they realize and understand that they're in the real world? And is it possible they might continue that behavior?
It was my belief that whether they were a murderer or not, they needed treatment.
They
Yeah,
did. They
absolutely.
Did.
Yeah, if they were to go to jail, that could wait until they were 18 or at least had sufficiently dealt with just the debrief and checking out of the game.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw your hand in the back.
Well, I don't know if many of you know this, but Sword Art Online Season 2 is coming out this July.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's covering the third arc of Sword Art Online, and from what I've heard, they actually expand more on like the period where everyone went through therapy and stuff after Sword Art Online was over, because in the second arc, they kind of skipped all these months that Kirito and all the others were in therapy. And so we didn't really get to know much of like the trauma and stuff. So I heard that in the third arc, they're gonna expand more on that.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's very
That's
exciting.
going to answer a
news.
lot of questions.
Yeah, it's going to answer quite a bit. It's very exciting news. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the problems is that it's assumed there is data left about the game. Because
Yeah.
it got deleted after everybody was supposedly logged out.
Maybe that's one of the reasons why they sent everybody to treatment rather than jail time is maybe there is no data left.
And on top of that, when PKers are first introduced, they aren't shown. Like, we don't know what they look like. We don't know how they act like. And the only one who really showed their face was killed almost like a few minutes afterwards anyways. So arguably speaking, these peak areas may not quote unquote exist in the public's eye because they've just never been mentioned. They can't be proven to exist. And they know of it, but doesn't mean they're there enough to prove it, I guess.
Well, that's the thing. I think the therapy part might actually touch on that. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because it's an important question, really, that the show itself still hasn't answered, really.
Sorry, cosplay system. But I think I saw your hand first. Yeah.
Just to mention, an interesting, like this is related to PK, but basically, an interesting about Sword Art Online versus Log Horizons. In Log Horizons, you have an open world where things that you normally can't do in the game, you could do, because it's like the real life became a game.
Yeah.
In Sword Art Online, you are confined by certain rules that are based on the game, and you can't do certain things. One thing that I was surprised at, but I guess this is because you can't really do this sort of stuff in the media and the works, but you can PK very easily without getting the red tag. And what you can do is, they've already shown all of these elements in the series, you can tie a rope to an object, immortal object, so you can't break the rope. You climb down the rope on the edge of the castle, because if you fall off the castle, you die. You set up a crystal gate, like a warp crystal, where they've used it several times in the series to teleport multiple people to different locations. So you set up a corridor crystal when you're on the rope over the edge of the castle. You climb back up, and after a raid, just say, guys, I've got a teleport crystal to get you guys out of the, back to the nearest city. Everyone teleports in there, they all fall off the castle, they all die to environmental damage, and you get no red tag. So just a little comment that you can ask you. Well, there's a guy who committed suicide by jumping off the castle. And there was the guy who... Well, no, in the anime, there's been shown that there's a guy who committed suicide.
He wasn't going on.
Yeah, he jumped off
after
off.
Sachi died.
So I'm glad
He was one of the members of Black Cat.
But the thing is, warp crystals don't work like that. You have a crystal that is the activator. You go in
And you get teleported to a
Teleport to
designated
city.
location.
You're teleported to designated city.
Oh, do you teleport to
Yeah.
designated city? I thought it was, according to knowledge, get set at a designated location.
One that teleports to prison though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
but
prison.
that teleports to prison.
But
So I don't know
every
if
time
it's
you're about to teleport, they'll declare where you're teleporting to. Use the city name because those are the receivers.
But if you set it over like a city, what I'm saying is like they could, because it could be in the confines of the city, but it could be on the edge of the city if it happened to be next to the wall.
But they always warp in the same place, don't they?
It depends, it's not really explained, but based on the rules that are given, you could do it.
Anyways, they use a
Conversations over there.
They teleport to a certain
Debate time.
location in the city. They cannot just teleport anywhere.
Okay, well,
But
yeah.
this is what I mean about the whole red tag thing. There are ways, many, potentially infinite ways of killing people without getting a red tag, which is why even had the logs not been deleted, it still wouldn't have solved all the murders.
Very
Right.
true.
Like in the side stories, the novels, I think Kirito almost gets PK'd by someone because they use monsters to lure them in and kill them, or to kill them.
Well, you mentioned the differences between the Log Horizon and Sword Art Online. Log Horizon feels like the characters, even though they have their own memory from the past, so long as they don't get killed, of course, seem to be a lot more part of the game in the sense that they can actually develop spells that changes the world and its rules. That's rather interesting.
No, not really.
Molly, I think there's some questions over here on this side.
Yes. So you, and then you.
So in terms of the whole idea of knowing who the PKers were, actually in the later novels, which the anime is based off of, it is confirmed that they knew who the PKers were because they specifically got sent to a reformatory school separate from the other people. Secondly, in terms of the rehabilitation, it was shown that it was less than effective, and yeah, for people who are interested, you do get to see a lot more of the PKers in later novels.
To be fair, that was a one case. Maybe to help them, but that was not one person.
There were at least two characters who caused PKers who caused
It
issues.
was the two siblings, right?
Yeah.
But the other one wasn't actually in the game, was it? It was just just the older brother. The other guy he wants to mimic him.
You might be right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you're probably right on that.
So what do you have to say?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, just stepping away from Sword Art Online for a moment.
Yeah.
What do you guys think is the reason why this kind of theme or genre is becoming so popular lately? Is it just kind of a new way to put a take on the Lord of the Flies concept of putting people from a normal regular society into an opportunity where they don't have to follow the rules anymore?
I think yes, it's because it's more relatable for people in our day and age than for somebody to get trapped on an island or something.
Well, I think it's a variation of another genre, which is basically the guy who's in the modern world who suddenly falls in a hole and finds himself in the fantasy world. It's pretty much the same thing, except in
Down the rabbit hole.
down the rabbit hole, or or whatever. But it's an old style of story, really. Alice in Wonderland and all that. But the difference is it's put into a really modern context. This time, instead of a fantasy world, it's a world we actually built ourselves. So in a way, it's still pretty much the same thing. It's just that this time we've got computers involved instead of an actual fantasy world, and therefore we sort of we make the fantasy world that much more real because of it, in a sense, and the story more credible. So I think it's a variant of that genre, really. And you can go so many ways with it. You can go the way that you just mentioned, or you can go into, well, like I said, Alice in Wonderland, or
You?
Sorry. Adding on to it, with the recent research done with computer and neural interface,
it wouldn't be surprising that people are getting more and more interested into virtual reality, especially, for example, Oculus Rift.
Yes.
So, yeah, Facebook.
Oh God. That's going to be terrifying.
So yeah, I'll visit my virtual Facebook house.
Well, that's the thing, you know?
Molding the
People
world around you to what you want it.
Look, they're
Because
putting
that-
the wallpaper on the ceiling.
Yeah, because people, you know, you read, you know, like, if you had the chance to go to Middle Earth, you know, you had a fantasy world that felt so incredibly real, and you really were in Middle Earth, wouldn't you want to try it, you know? But then the question becomes, well, you know, what would happen if you got trapped there? So, like I said, it's that change of genre, but this time, hey, it's a lot more possible now to actually fall into that fantasy world because we got computers.
Where's the guy behind you?
You mentioned that part of the major difference was between this idea of the fantasy world and this computer world. I guess my major question is, what's really the difference?
Well, exactly. That's the thing, because we're getting at a point where we're trying to make this fantasy as real as possible, and try to make it as if you really were there, and that's the aim. And like I said, the question becomes the existential question. It becomes what happens when you suddenly you lose yourself into that world. And I think that's a little bit the questions that's really asked in those shows. What happens when you get lost into that world? You know, Log Horizon, the thing about getting killed and losing your memory. That suddenly becomes a danger. You become detached from reality, and that's what's insidious with the danger of that particular show. But that's sort of like the existential questions that asked from those shows, really. And when we get involved in these kinds of games, but then again, RPG is, at least in North America, the question has always been, do players understand the difference between reality and fact? Most of it, I would personally say, most of the time, that's not really a problem. But they probably are even more grounded in reality and understand the difference between the two. But it's still a question because nobody really studied the difference between somebody who plays an RPG and their understanding of reality versus fantasy, versus somebody who never played a single RPG and their understanding of fantasy versus reality. I don't think there's a real study, but it'd be interesting if somebody actually did that. See how that comes out.
Can I pose a follow-up?
Yeah.
I know there are others, but I apologize. I think more of my question is comparing the genre of MMO animes to something like the recent anime No Game, No Life, where they are teleported into another world.
Yeah.
What makes the real difference between this MMO world and this different world, this entirely different world?
There are still, most of, so far anyway, as far as the game versions are concerned, there's still little signs that show that they are in a game, like you suddenly see a panel show up and they start typing on it, and that's always seems to be a bit of a reminder that they're in the game, really. But other than these little things, not really that much of a difference. Yeah.
Well, actually, if I may answer your question, I think the real difference is that if you do an anime on an MMO instead of like a completely different fantasy world, then it's actually easier to relate to, because if you're familiar with MMOs, then like you can see how this world works, and you can actually immerse yourself more and relate more to the characters, because really they still act as if they're in a game, and it's really more relatable when you do an MMO and you don't have to explain as much. Whereas if you do a completely different fantasy world, then you have to explain a lot more how the world works. And you can see that the characters aren't as familiar with it. It's actually harder for the characters to integrate themselves in the world.
Yeah, it's a good observation. Because it's also true that when they approach the MMO, you can see things that you see from real MMOs, the ones that people play. So they use a lot of the lingo and a lot of the visuals that you would expect from those games. They show up in there. So yeah, it is indeed a lot more relatable in that sense. Well,
in the new movie coming out, Edge of Tomorrow, it's very difficult in the movie to differentiate between reality and fantasy. How would you think they would relate to that? Because in order to restart, they kill each other.
Yeah, that's actually a very different thing. It's more like a Groundhog Day. Not that particular movie. And in this case,
like they're stuck.
Yeah, but it like I said, it's more like Groundhog Day, except it's a sci-fi with alien invaders. But the thing is, and I think he's stuck there until he actually wins. It does feel like a game in terms of the description of it, but it's in this case, it's his life. It really is his life. He can't. Not only can he not log out, he can't think of having logged in the first place. This is his life. This is different, I think. So there's no alternative life for him to remember. So I think that's a big difference between that movie and say what we're talking about. Is for him, that's real life, and boy, he hates getting killed all the time.
What was the name of that movie again?
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow.
I think it would be more relatable to Steins Gate instead. If you've seen Steins Gate, then like rewinding back in time and stuff, it would be more relatable to that.
Oh yeah, that's a head fuck right there. Yeah. Yep.
When I hear the concept of what is reality and what is fiction, a common observation I've watched in, for example, Dot Hack and Sword Art Online is that the laws of consequence, that for every action there is a consequence, or be it a good or evil, be it subjective thereof. It's when you put reality into the fiction, that law of once you die, it's over, you then incorporate the reality into a fictional world which you can create virtually anything within the game's parameters. You then know what is reality and what is fiction by the parameters of the world. In our world, we are sort of we sort of are clashing with two different forces. We've got the cosmic physics that we all know, general relativity, and then we've got the quantum mechanics, which are the subatomic particles that consist of you and me. And if we go into the game world, then we're determined virtually by the quantum nature of the binary coding, a limited structure. And from that, whoever can manipulate it then controls that reality. But when they come to the real world, it becomes more diverse to where...
No, there is that thing. The thing is, being the emotional creatures that we are, we tend to muck it up quite a bit. Because we can define it the way you just did, but the problem is, and this is the way a lot of psychologists sort of describe the way we think, is we start with belief, and then we go and look for anything that supports that belief system. So if you're into the game, and then all of a sudden this game character shows up and says, well, you know what, if you kill somebody, that person is going to die, not just here, but in the real world. If you believe that this game character is just giving you bullshit for the game, then you got a bit of a problem. So it does become at some point a question of personal belief. And that's where the whole thing about differentiation between reality and fact becomes a bit of a problem, really. And if you get messed up during the game and the experiences are very traumatic, once you come out, you're not out of the woods, because then are you really out of the game, or is this another part of the game? And then, you know, like I said, there's a lot of that existential thing that one's getting involved. And everything you experience suddenly becomes suspicious. Because that's the thing, everything you see, even if you touch, could be the illusion onto your brain. You know, well, you're touching this, but are you really touching this? Or is it just a signal being sent to your brain telling you you're touching this? So, like I said, then it really becomes, okay, am I still in the game, or am I Inception? What can I say?
The follow-up would be, especially when they, in the game of Sword Art Online, is when they set up guilds to protect the young. And then, in a way, they brought the empathy, the human emotion of empathy, and the betterment for everyone else, to where they worked together against the PKEers. And the PKEers were just going off by kill or be killed, that kind of war. Hence, I would say that given the situation, I guess the leniency was reformation, because at the core of it was a woman in the left side of the audience said it best. They did need treatment when they were exposed back to the reality.
Well, it messes you up big time.
It does.
In Total Recall, they really mess with whether what's real and what's fantasy.
They're stuck in an MMORPG for you, and the thing is, you don't know if you are in the MMORPG or not.
Because you don't know which one is real.
That's the problem here. That movie pretty much tells you about, you know, are you in the game or are you in reality? You know, and you can say, well, yeah, I'm touching the table. Yeah, but the computer's telling you like you're touching the table. Or do you know if it's a computer or if you're out of that game? Well, that's kind of difficult to tell. Now, we're not at that point, but this is where we're aiming. So these stories are pretty much cautionary in a sense. That?
Yes, just wanted to add to the fact of it kind of feels like the Matrix in some point.
Yeah.
Where do you know if you are in real life or you're just kind of in a simulated life? Like, where's the line
That's the thing. Now, of course, in these ones, it's a bit more obvious because there's such a big difference between the fantasy world and the real one.
Yeah,
but still, the question about consequences, you know, when you're inside the game and it tells you that what you're doing inside the game is going to have an effect in the real world, that's when the question comes into play. And that's where, because there's such a big difference between the two, that's when you're not sure if the instructions you're receiving are real or not. And that's even more messed up. There?
Yeah, well, basically, like, from my point of view, basically, Sword Art Online, at first, everyone was aware that they were in a game. Like, the first day, of course, everyone was aware that they were in a game.
Yeah.
And then, like, the boss said, like, the big ghost in the sky said, well, you die in the game and you die in real life. So that kind of, like, blurred the line between reality and
It does too, because the thing is, they've been 2 years in there, so it kind of becomes their reality, really.
Yeah, that's the
It
thing.
becomes
Like,
their daily life.
even though they are aware that this is not the real world, well, they adapted to it. And at some point, like, Kirito says to Asuna, like, why don't we just stay here? Why don't we just stay in the game and live, like, a happy
Because
life?
they have they've lost concept of what's happening outside of the game.
But then, like, Asuna reminds them, well, we're not going to live forever because we're probably on hospital beds right now and we're slowly dying from that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, you know, being what we are, we tend to stay aware of our environment, and trying to look beyond what it is that we see and we feel is kind of becomes difficult. The more you live into that existence, the more you forget about what's outside. and that's the way we perceive things. And we have, and obviously in the show they understand that, and some characters try to remind everybody else.
And also for like player killers, like I would say in terms of like psychology, it's true that some people have difficulty like saying, well, it's like if the game master told you that if you die in the game, you die in real life, why didn't you believe him? Well, sometimes it's the same as like people who get announced that they have cancer and then they're in denial. They're like, oh, I'm totally fine. I'm sure it's totally fine. This is not real.
No, but that's the thing. You know, I got a game character telling me that this is real. Come on. You know, I've been in this game. I wanted to, you know, because I'm in a fake world, I get the chance to find out what it's like to kill somebody. And I got this ghost in the sky telling me that, no, come on, that's bullshit. I'm going to try it anyway. So, you know, but obviously somebody who thinks that way is already a bit, yeah. So, yeah.
I don't entirely think it's because they're cuckoo. It's more like a survival of the fittest.
It kind of is, but like I said, the fact that they disregard what's been told about the consequences.
I mean, in real life, if we didn't have any laws or police, there could be people that do the same thing that they would do in Sword Art Online, and like rob and steal.
No, well, you got player killers who do it because they have a reason. You know, somebody is getting in their way, or they need to get something. There are others that do it for the fun of it. You know, because, well, they love to see the world burn. They want to be the guys who get the power of having killed someone. It's not true of everyone. Each player killers have each their own reason why they do it. They're all very different. Some are more questionably more sane than others, but it really depends what their reason for doing it is.
Oh, and just like when you think of it, just because some people might think when the game master in the sky says, oh, these are the rules, blah, 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 how do you know that he's actually telling you the truth? How do you know that this isn't, oh, this is an experiment. We're going to see who like actually is going to test these consequences. Like, just like you don't believe everything on the internet, this guy could be bullshitting you, you don't know that.
You live in the real world. Scientists tell you that doing this is going to have that consequence. And you got shitloads of people who say, bullshit to you, I don't care if you've done thousands of experiments on this particular thing, I believe that instead. Well, you got that problem in the real world, so imagine in the fantasy world.
And it's in a game too.
Yeah, exactly.
So people
exactly. Well, in a game is a fantasy. So you're in the fantasy world, and the fantasy character tells you this is what's going to happen in the real world. Some people aren't all going to believe it. Yeah.
What changes or improvements would you make to Sword Art Online?
We're not online.
Not having people die?
Start. There's the second arc. The second arc gets a little weird.
No, it stops getting weird.
Well,
Turns into like a classic.
yeah.
That's the thing. The second half feels more like heroic fantasy than the first one. The first one had some real tension to it.
The first one had more psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Which is what made it the anime we really enjoyed.
The second one felt like a completely different series. Really. Not that I did not enjoy it. I did, but as a different story.
Exactly.
It didn't feel like it belonged to what we saw in the first half. I don't know that I changed it, but I just say it was a serious turn in a different direction. I'll wait for the third chapter to see if there's any repercussion from that. But yeah.
I don't know if I would really change much about the thing, except for maybe one thing. I felt a little gypped, just slightly, at the end of Act 1, when it's like you're on floor 75 and he figures it out. I was like, well, I wouldn't mind of seeing the next 25 floors, because that sounds like it would have been amazing boss battle kind of stuff. But
it could have been.
There's a lot more side story in the light novels. Yep.
Actually, he does bring a good point, and spoilers for anybody that didn't watch it. That brings the topic of when you're trapped in a MMORPG, wouldn't it be the situation where you don't want admins or moderators or game masters as players? Because they already, like beta players, and these are categories where you know you're at a disadvantage and you're at the mercy of those that have an already higher advantage of you if you're trapped in the MMORPG.
The reason why I think I would not change that is because in a way it reflects what you often have in RPGs, especially when you do have a dungeon master who participates. Players muck up your your plans. Players wind up doing something you didn't expect them to do. And I think that particular moment is exactly what happened. He had a very specific plan up to the 100th level, and somebody mucked up his plan, and he had to react. And I think that is what it really represented. The game master plans mucked up.
In like that last conversation before like the big battle between Kirito and what's his name? They talking. It sounds like he wanted somebody to figure out.
Yeah, he did.
It was going to happen.
He did. It's just that, like I said, if you play an RPG, not so much on the computer, but with real people, with a dungeon master, and the dungeon master participates into this, the players have a tendency of going outside of what it is that you have planned as far as storyline. And this is what he was doing. He was participating. He was trying to push the players in a particular direction. And the players went in the direction he didn't expect. And I think that moment, the reason why they cut off at that particular point was that representation. The player outsmarting the dungeon master, doing something that he didn't expect him to do. And I think that's what that moment really represented. That's why the whole top 25 were trashed, because somebody trashed his plan in the first place, discovered who he was, and he didn't get to do what he was planning to do in the first place.
Something I would change? Less romance.
Especially with his cousin.
More story, less romance.
In terms of the Kirito storyline, as the ending, I find that it's quite symbolic that the beta tester actually beats the game master, because the beta testers are there to test the limits of the game and bring it out. That just brought the show to a different level, because you have this beta tester, you expected so much from them, and they just go above and beyond.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's the thing. They're allowed to look behind the mechanics of the game. And they know the tricks. They start to recognize the little signatures of the designer and that sort of stuff. It is indeed very symbolic.
I'd like to bring another issue. In the final boss battle between the Game Master and Kirito, and Kirito dies and then goes back to life. Does anyone has an explanation for that?
Probably I can, is using World of Warcraft. Remember when you kill a boss and that boss is killed outright at the moment you die, and the cutscene plays and you find yourself warped back to the state? You could say, because he managed to beat the game, find out who the game creator was and delivered the final blow as he was dying, he basically essentially won the game, which negated his death.
Yeah, you could say that you got a bug in the game that, you know, and that's pretty much what happened. The fact that he did manage to beat the game just as he was dying, that's what pretty much saves it.
Well, are you asking whether, like, how he was able to stay alive?
Yeah, because the thing is, like, the game master actually like kills Kirito before Kirito actually like impales his sword inside. Yeah, that's like the most common theory. I was just wondering if like someone else had another explanation.
Well, the fact that he still managed to kill, to give the final blow, you know, still had just enough life to do it. Otherwise, if he was dead, well, if it was dead, he wouldn't be able to do a blow, right? When you're dead, okay, I'm gonna kill you now. I'm dead. No, got a blow in. He killed him. He won. So some, you know, I've played games where just as I was dying, managed to kill something, and then, well, okay, the game because it's the game that decides this, that follows its own programming. Goes, well, you know what? You just killed somebody. You won. Oh, you got practically zero. Doesn't matter. You managed to kill the other one 0. My program says, okay, you've won, and doesn't go on with your death, but goes on with the whole victory dance or whatever.
Okay,
and that's the program. Blame the program.
We only have 5 minutes left until the crowd can do the judges. So we can only take probably 2 more questions, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yes, you.
Okay,
Your arm's probably getting sore.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to ask, or basically like an open question, is which series between Log Horizon and Sword Art Online brings out the worst of evil in the humans? Like, as a note, the characters in Log Horizon, they don't die, but they do lose their memory. But one difference is that in Log Horizon, there are these NPCs, which when compared to the Sword Art Online NPCs, they are a bit more sentient, and you do have to assume that they are pretty much as big as you are. So in Log Horizon, you have these superhumans who have this immense power over what essentially amounts to normal human players. And in both games, you do have, you know, killing, raping, torture, that sort of stuff. So, you know, based on that, you know, which do you think has most
Well, I think Log Horizon still hasn't shown all darkness or anything. If you compare the 2 shows based on what's already come out, I would say that Sword Art Online is definitely darker. You have the tension practically from episode 1 on to when they finally came out. But Sword Art Online, Log Horizon, so far, most characters seem to be cooperating along and working together. There's a bit of dissension, but we haven't gone to the point yet where they act like they're Superman or anything. Like I said, so far, considering the power that they have, they're rather well behaved. So
because
we've yet to see.
What I was usually referring to is like in Brigantia, the Suzuki note, where they completely walled off the city to, you know, trap all the players inside.
Yeah,
there's another thing that can also happen is, you know, the modern city stuff where you can purchase stones, purchase buildings, blacklist certain people from either entering or leaving. And later in the novels, because we did talk about the Sword Art Online novels, I'm also referring to Log Horizon novels as well. Later in the novels, you do get a lot of darker stuff that doesn't really get portrayed in anime.
Well, like I said, I'm hoping to see more when it comes out. Because, yeah, no, there's a great deal of potential for darkness there, but like I said, I don't feel that they've even begun to really explore that question yet. It's there, but I think it's coming.
Yeah.